My name is Lisa Field, and I'm the president of the Labor Guild. On behalf of the Labor Guild's Board of Directors and our Executive Director, Father Mark Fallon, welcome to our event tonight. We are joined by our partners from MassCOSH and the Massachusetts Nurses Association on a panel discussion about organizing and advocating politically around health and safety. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to add them under comments on Facebook, and we will try to get them towards the end of the program. Joining me tonight is Al Vega, Chief of Strategy and Engagement at MassCOSH, Jodi Sugerman-Brozan, Deputy Chief of Worker Empowerment at the City of Boston, and Karen Coughlin, Registered Nurse from the MNA's Board of Directors and Chair of the MNA's Workplace Violence Task Force. Again, thank you for joining us, and Al will kick us off.
Thanks so much, Lisa, for having us tonight. And thank you for all who are tuning in this evening via Facebook Live. I know we have figured out how to best use virtual kind of options to share information about what's going on at our organizations, as well as how you can get more involved. And so tonight we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how we've at MassCOSH in particular have been able to turn what was a very tragic incident into an opportunity to really move our city, the city of Boston, and potentially now looking to do similar efforts across the state so that we can better enhance worker protections. And so for those of you who don't know, MassCOSH is the Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health. It was founded in 1976 and was created after the passing of the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, really as a way to ensure that the laws and regulations and standards that were being developed at OSHA didn't only live on paper, and that people actually got information and were aware of how these new laws and regulations could actually be used to keep them safe. And so our organization was founded primarily by union activists, and MassCOSH is currently also represented by the Steelworkers Local 9358, of which I am also the president of the bargaining unit. So if we move on to the next slide, I can talk a little bit more about the specific incident that I'm going to be talking about today in terms of how we turned tragedy into advocacy. And so the pictures you see here at the bottom left are of Robert Higgins and Kelvin Maddox. These are two men who went to work for a company, Atlantic Drain, a company they believe would keep them safe. What many might not be aware of is that the work that these men was inherently dangerous, but supposedly existing laws and regulations were supposed to make sure that protections were in place to prevent the unnecessary workplace injuries and incidents that sadly we know is what happened to these two gentlemen. On October 21st, 2016, these men went to work and unfortunately were not able to go back home to their families. They tragically lost their lives after failures by Atlantic Drain to properly train them around building a trench box, which is on the right-hand side of this slide. You can see there's workers and a Boston Fire overlooking what looks to be a hole, which is now filled with water and mud. And unfortunately, those two workers are also in that hole as a result of the trench collapsing because there was no trench box. And so we know that at MassCOSH, we kind of began to figure out what were the reasons why something like this actually happened. And so we were trying to think, was there something at the city, the state, or federal level that could have prevented this? So during that investigation, we found out that the city of Boston's permitting procedures, as well as those statewide, were relatively weak. And nowhere in those procedures was there any accounting for companies that had poor safety records. So we also found out that Atlantic Drain had a really long and terrible safety record that unfortunately the city was not aware of when they gave them those permits. So tonight we're going to hear a little bit more about our efforts with, joining city officials as well as those from the city and state building trades councils, and bringing in national legal experts to also help us think about potential best policies or practices that we could have introduced to help change what happened to those two workers. And so ultimately, you'll see that we helped to get the city to file an ordinance. And to this day, we continue to work, I think, closely with the city as well as the city council to think about ways in which we can strengthen the existing laws that we know will ensure that only safe companies are being awarded the kinds of permits that will be that ultimately are allowed to do the kind of dangerous work that these two men unfortunately succumbed to a tragedy that day as a result of a company not taking the appropriate measures to protect them. So next slide. If you can see on this next slide, there is a little bit more information about, what we do at MassCOSH. And, our organization monitors workplace fatalities on an annual basis by trying to gather as many details and info through a range of sources. So that might be through the media, death certificates. We have what's called the Health Technical Network, which is made up of occupational safety and health experts and academics and advocates. We also have a lawyers committee, and we have worker centers that tend to also receive information about worker fatalities that we gather as well for this report. So we try to, as best as we can, assess and analyze the hazards and the potential violations that may have led to some of these incidents. And when possible, we try to, if we can, release a press statement that both honors that lost worker or workers, but also shares a lot of the recommendations and things that we believe can be done to prevent future tragedies. We work really closely with allies to elevate that particular case and make sure that we, seek justice or potentially think about a policy change that will ultimately involve family members. Sometimes family members' direct testimony and involvement in these efforts is what actually gets decision makers to actually change laws and regulations. And so we want to make sure that the voices of those who are most impacted are part of our advocacy efforts as well. And so you can see here on this image, in the top left is our annual report, which is called Dying for Work in Massachusetts, the loss of life and limb in Massachusetts workplaces. And so this report is put out around every April 28th, which also happens to be Workers' Memorial Day, which is an opportunity to honor all workers that we've lost in workplaces over the last year. And so here in the bottom right, you see a picture of the Maddox family actually at the Workers' Memorial Day after losing their loved one. And they were there to, again, show that this is something, unfortunately, that many families every year have to deal with when employers don't do enough to keep their workers safe. And in the worst cases, workers don't get to go back home to their families. And so we use this day to really uplift and honor these workers by reading the names of those workers we lost, but also making sure that if there's something that we can do to prevent this, whether it be laws, regulations, or standards, or maybe it's looking at additional fines and penalties that can deter bad employers from actually putting their workers' lives at risk in the first place. Because a lot of the times it costs a lot less to pay a fine to OSHA than it does to actually invest in safety equipment. So we try to use this day as best as we can to uplift the need for better protections. Next slide. So how did we do it? I think, at MassCOSH, we have folks who are on our staff, volunteers with our health tech committee, folks from our lawyers committee, as well as, allies from like the Metro Boston building trades and unions like the pipe fitters and plumbers who wanted to kind of figure out what could be done to help prevent a tragedy like this. And so a coalition began to reach out to the mayor's office, demanding that something be done by the administration to, again, avert other tragedies like this in the future. The city was able to respond, and a process began to come up with, a possible solution. And where they landed was deciding to amend the city's permitting process to include OSHA violation or safety history. So we were able to initiate some research in conjunction with a National Protecting Workers Alliance listserv, which included the National Employment Law Project. And we were able to kind of seek out possible examples that we might be able to then use as a model for the city. So the city was able to create a working group to look at recommendations, and a new permitting form was drafted by MassCOSH staff and allies, and also included other coalition members, which actually some of them were from industry and business associations as well. The State Department of Labor Standards, as well as OSHA, offered consultation with this coalition and the city working group to ensure, again, that they were keeping everything in mind that might be necessary for the ordinance to actually be functional and for them to be able to enforce it. And ultimately, at the end, the draft that the city landed on was a little different than what we had at MassCOSH, but we felt that because of the timing, we had to move pretty quickly to ensure that something was passed by the city council before the end of 2016, so that it could be enacted and implemented in 2017. And so we kind of, I think, agreed to the recommendations for the other language, ultimately knowing that the mayor really wanted to be on record as responding to the incident. So this particular ordinance also requires licensed subcontractors to share the violations that they have as well. Next slide. So on this slide, you can quickly just see what we were able to get out of the ordinance, and it's called the Maddox-Higgins Affidavit of Workplace Safety, which it was named in honor of those two workers that were lost that day in the South End. And so this form, asks companies about their severe violations and whether they're part of the OSHA Severe Violator Program. The city is actually now able to automatically deny permits to any company that is enrolled in that program. I think one of the other things that's good about this form is that it allows contractors not only have to report OSHA violations of the current company that's requesting the permit, but if there's affiliated businesses associated with this company as well, all of 5 years of health and safety records must also be included as part of this affidavit. And so I believe this goes looks into the last 5 years of violations. Another part of this document is called the EMR, or the Experience Modification Rating. And this determines actually how much an employer pays into the workers' comp system. And it's based on the number of violations, the amount and the fees that those violations brought, and any medical costs associated with the claims. And so an EMR rating of under 1 signifies that they pay a lower rate and therefore most likely have less workers' comp incidents than an employer that has a 1 or higher, and might actually be a flag to the city when that EMR is much higher as well. And then next slide, just wanted to quickly show you all how fast we moved from the mayor feeling like his hands were tied and he wasn't going to be able to do much a few days after the incident. A month later, after conversations with our coalition, the mayor feels like there is something that he can do and pushes for more oversight of those contractors. And ultimately, 1 month later, we are able to celebrate a victory at City Hall when the City Council passed an ordinance to actually enact the affidavit on safety and health that we've fought diligently for those few weeks leading up to the end of the year. So just to kind of wrap up, I think we continue to kind of figure out, are there things that the city is doing to make sure that they'll have the ability to analyze what's in those that history that's being shared? Is it accurately being tracked? The other thing that I think it opened up the opportunity for was national, statewide legislation. And so immediately following the passing of this ordinance, at the time, Representative Byron Rushing of the South End worked with our coalition to push for a bill specifically to expand similar efforts statewide to basically look at safety and health violations of companies that were getting state permits and contracts. And so unfortunately, Byron Rushing stepped down, and Senator Feeney and Representative Michelle Dubois have been the most recent champions on this effort, but sadly, it did not get through the last session. And so there's conversations on trying to figure out how we kind of go back to the drawing board and see if we can get a lot more support for something similar on a statewide effort. And so, although it's been years since this occurred, I think in particular, I wanted to highlight that the city of Boston, first under Mayor Walsh and now under Mayor Wu, has continued moving closer to doing more to protect workers from unnecessary injury, illness, and preventable workplace deaths, where they have, some jurisdiction to actually strengthen existing laws and implement new measures that we know will ultimately keep workers and the general public safe. So I think this is a great opportunity to hear a little bit more about what's actually happening at the city of Boston. So I would like to turn over the presentation over to my former colleague, the former MassCOSH executive director, who is now currently the deputy chief of the newly created Worker Empowerment Cabinet at the City of Boston, Jodi Sugerman-Brozan. Welcome, Jodi.
Al, thank you so much, and thank you so much to the Labor Guild and MassCOSH tonight. It's really nice to be here. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about the new cabinet. As most folks know, Mayor Wu created the new cabinet for worker empowerment on Labor Day. Among other pieces, among the parts of her vision around this cabinet was to specifically do anything the city could to create a culture of safety and health on work sites and help improve worker health and safety in the city of Boston. And this was on the heels of many people have seen some more recent tragic fatalities in the city, specifically on construction sites. And the new cabinet has a key role in developing strategies to try to prevent that from happening. So as Al said, my new title is Deputy Chief of Worker Empowerment, and I'm leading the new Office for Labor Compliance and Worker Protections. And really what this office does is uses the power and scale of the city's procurement process to drive safe, equitable hiring and labor standards for all workers in Boston. And part of the things that are already ongoing that are coming into this office is enforcement of the Boston Jobs, Living Wage, and Prevailing Wage Ordinance, which says that if you are an employee and you work for a vendor who is a City of Boston vendor or who has a contract with the City of Boston, you need to be paid the living wage at $16.38, updated annually. The Boston Wage Theft Ordinance really leverages the power of the city's licensing board to really enforce or provide more teeth on wage theft issues. If you're found to have the attorney general or someone makes a complaint about wage theft, we can look into that and report it to the licensing board, which covers all different kinds of businesses in Boston and can affect your ability to be able to actually renew or get a license to operate in the city of Boston. And the Boston Resident Jobs Policy, which is coming into our office, which is a local hiring that says if you are a public contract or if you are a private development over 50,000 square feet, you need to hire 50% Boston residents, 40% people of color, and 12% women. The really new pieces of the work is around worker health and safety, and really we're in the first stages of this. And I want to say a little bit about the Higgins-Maddox affidavit, which is such an important tool, and the Inspectional Services Department handles thousands of permits every year. And one of the most important pieces is that contractors actually have to tell the truth on the affidavit. And if folks remember, there was a contractor who blatantly lied about their health and safety history, ironically called Atlantic Coast Utilities, not related at all to Atlantic Drain. And after lying, they were able to secure their permits. And from there, they had two workers who were killed after getting knocked into a trench. So, we can have these amazing tools in place, but they're not foolproof, and we know that. And one of the first things that we're looking at is, how do we try to ensure that and define what it means to be a responsible contractor in Boston. And that means having a record of protecting your workers, not only from health and safety hazards, but also from wage and hour and other issues. We, like MassCOSH always has, we know that workers need to know their rights in order to be able to exercise those rights. So one of the very first things that I'm working on right now is developing some fact sheets that'll go on our new website to help employers know their responsibility, help workers know their rights, and employers know their responsibilities. And these are tools that we're working on right now. We're going to hopefully do some training specifically with small and medium-sized contractors. And I've been really looking at data in the city of Boston to try to understand what is how workers are getting hurt and how workers are dying, to be able to prioritize efforts. And we know here in the city that the OSHA data shows that with severe injuries over the last 6 or 7 years, about 30% are in construction. That doesn't surprise folks, but 35% were as a result of falls. And we know, and Al knows this well, fall prevention is very straightforward. No one should be getting injured or dying as a result of falls. So we're really looking at prioritizing doing some health and safety training with our partners at OSHA on fall protection here in the city of Boston, and working into that access to resources for training and support, and partnering with friends at the Department of Labor Standards who offer on-site consultation, where they'll come on your site and review and identify hazards, and employers just need to commit to actually making changes to reduce or eliminate those hazards. So we're working now to try to better understand what's going on and develop strategies around health and safety, because this is the newest part of the cabinet's work, and working really closely with inspectional services and other agencies in the city of Boston to try to outline those strategies, for which I'm sure we'll be able to share more soon. But really wanting to define what it means to be a good partner, a good employer in the city of Boston. And that is part of that, of being a responsible contractor, being a responsible employer in Boston, means keeping your workers safe.
Thanks, Jodi, for sharing a little bit more about what's been going on in your relatively new role at the city of Boston. And I know we have you for a few more minutes, and I was actually wondering if we could maybe ask you a question or two before you officially have to leave us, if that's all right. Yeah.
Hopefully I can answer it.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the questions I have, and I know I hear this all the time when there's new attempts to kind of really try to get a better sense of what companies are doing and keeping track of all that. Companies will always say, this is too burdensome, and we're not going to be able to do these things. What is your response to companies that are trying to push back maybe on some of the efforts that the city is trying to push forward? Because we know ultimately this is how we get a better sense of what's happening, but you always get those business associations and employers who want to be kind of the loud voice in the room saying we shouldn't even be considering some of these things because it's just too burdensome. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's two answers, because here in the city, we have many large contractors who have full safety departments and have a lot of capacity. And those contractors are able to provide the training. We have union partners, and we know that those who go through union training, apprenticeships, they get a lot more health and safety training. And then we have smaller contractors where, frankly, a lot of the injuries are happening. And I think one of the things that we really want to be doing is not just say, you need to do this, but try to provide the training and resources. That's a big part of what this new cabinet is about, is making sure that we're linking people to the resources they need to be successful. And we're doing a lot of work on that. I mean, the reality is that some health and safety fixes are so inexpensive, and that it's just a matter of having the capacity to identify those hazards and look at those hazards, which is why the on-site consultation program that Department of Labor Standards is such a good tool. They'll come and help you identify the hazards. You just need to commit to eliminating those hazards. So we're really trying to lay that out. And I think demonstrating your health and safety history is not hard. That's what the Maddox-Higgins is all about, just disclosing what it is that has been in the past. And then also, if you have a health and safety violation and you're not part of the severe violator program, what have you done to address that, so that we can better understand that you've learned and made improvements. So I think there are maybe things that are more expensive, but in the vast majority of health and safety, it's about training and simple fixes. It's not always those very expensive things that make a difference and save lives.
I don't know if Karen or Lisa have a question they want to ask maybe before Jodi.
Just ask Jodi. Thank you, Jodi. So if people are looking for some more information about the department, where can they find that?
It's a great. So we're working on a new website. Right now, you can go to the Office of Workforce Development. The Office of Workforce Development is part of the new cabinet, and the website for the Office of Workforce Development has a section on labor compliance, and that says a little bit about the office. But I also encourage folks to get in touch with me. My email is really easy: jodi.sugerman-brozan, SUGERMAN BROZIN @boston.gov. And I can put that in the chat for people. And I'd love to hear from folks. Right now is really at a stage where we're meeting with partners, meeting with stakeholders, really trying to understand how we can create some short, medium, and long-term strategies to make a real difference. And I'd love for anybody who wants to be part of that process, talk to me. So I'm going to put my email in the chat.
And we can maybe we can share that in the Facebook Live for sure.
Yeah, sorry, I realized we're on.
No worries, no worries. No, thank you so much, Jodi. I think the last quick question I wanted to ask was around the materials that you guys are making. Are those going to be available in a variety of languages if a contractor is looking to get that for their employees?
So our plan is to create some fact sheets on knowing your rights, and that includes specific for Boston workers. So understanding their rights with regards to the living wage ordinance and the wage theft ordinance here in the city of Boston, and about hiring, and that they'll be created in multiple languages, downloadable from our website. That's one of the very first things we're working on. That'll be part of a new website for this office. And also looking to create a know your responsibilities guide for small and medium-sized contractors, and really understanding how to break down some of the barriers so that some of those contractors can access City of Boston contracts that they've been precluded from, and being able to ensure that they know how to be successful in those contracts. They know how to keep their workers safe, how to make sure they're following wage and hour laws, how to ensure that they know how to get permits from Inspectional Services Department. We're working to build those tools first while we plan out long-term strategies around addressing health and safety and things that we can be doing to at the municipal level in partnership with our state and federal partners on keeping workers safe, starting with construction and moving from there.
Great. Thanks so much, Jodi, and really looking forward to our continued partnership with the city, and of course working with you again. So I hope thank you again so much for joining us tonight. I know you have a very tight schedule, but really appreciate you sharing a little bit about what the city is doing to kind of build on the health and safety efforts that you were a part of and when we were able to get that affidavit done. So thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me so much. I really appreciate it. And please reach out so we really want to be partnering with folks as we move forward. And of course, I know we'll be looking forward to partnering with MassCOSH, Labor Guild, MNA as we move forward with our work. Well, thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Jodi.
Thank you again. Have a great holiday season, Jodi. Thanks
Have a
again.
good one, Jodi.
And thank you both of you for your tremendous advocacy and really turning this tragedy into advocacy and ultimately to action on behalf of workers to improve their health and safety conditions. And I'd also like to now turn it over to Karen Coughlin from the Massachusetts Nurses Association's Board of Directors. She's also the chair of the MNA's Workplace Violence Prevention Task Force to talk about an important issue to healthcare workers, which is workplace violence. So Karen.
Thank you, Lisa. I would like to talk a little bit before we start just about the Massachusetts Nurses Association in general. We represent over 25,000 nurses and healthcare professionals across the state. They range from all the way out to the Berkshires, all the way down to Cape Cod. And wherever you would think, we represent like approximately 75% of nurses and healthcare workers in our acute care facilities. We also represent in public agencies, school nurses. You think of any type of healthcare setting, you know, we've got members there. That being said, I would say that we have over the last 20 years been working and continuing to work on responses to workplace violence in our healthcare facilities from across the state. And I think we can go to the next slide, if we could. And these are just some of the statistics, because honestly, I think lately, as of late, it's been more in the news, but it has been around a long time. And so, as you can see, you know, it does tell us that these are things that are taken from the Bureau of Labor Standards, from the US government, that although employees in healthcare and social assistance sectors only account for 12.2% of the working population, nearly 75% of workplace assaults occur in a healthcare setting. And nurses themselves are assaulted on the job more than police officers and prison guards, which is astounding. More than 70% of hospital emergency department nurses report being assaulted during their career. And violence against healthcare workers accounts for nearly as many injuries in all the other industries combined. I would also say that in Massachusetts, the MNA frequently will conduct surveys of the nursing workforce, and it's all nurses these surveys go out to. It is, you know, nurses from non-union and union hospitals. And in 2022, we did a state of nursing in Massachusetts, and nurses said that they were increasingly concerned about workplace violence. There was an 11-point uptick in nurses calling violence a major challenge from 2021 just to 2022, and a 16-point increase from 2019. So 38% of those nurses that were surveyed said workplace violence was such a challenge that it would impact their decision to leave the profession sooner. In April of 2022, a survey was done by National Nurses United, who, you know, represent, there's like 750,000 nurses in NNU across the country. They found a 119% increase in reports of violence from nurses between March 2021 to March of 2022. It's astounding. And on average, the US government, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, report that 44 workplace homicides to private healthcare workers occurred each year from 2016 through 2020. And, you know, many healthcare workers and nurses, we, you know, read articles all the time to keep up to date on things. And I would say that just this past week, Medscape, which is a publication, came out with an article that said earlier this year, there's a healthcare company called Press Ganey that is employed by the hospitals across the country to report on how well they're doing. So we always take that with a grain of salt, because we think some of their things probably is actually more than what Press Ganey would report. But it was amazing to me, because they reported that on average, 2 nurses are assaulted every hour. every hour across the country. That equates to 57 assaults a day, 1,739 assaults per month, 5,217 assaults per quarter. And in actuality, it equals 20,868 assaults per year against nurses. What we also know through publications and data surveys, et cetera, is that workplace violence incidents and assaults are underreported, that typically only about 30% of workplace assaults in the healthcare setting are reported. So if we could move on to the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about, why we do the things that we do on our task force. We do it because we know that there has to be an awareness and an increased awareness that the problem exists, it's not going away, and it's becoming worse. We also recognize that, it's a huge task to be able to educate people on workplace violence, because honestly, they think healthcare settings are a place of safety where people are taken care of. It's a haven, and that is no longer becoming the case. We need to educate our nurses, our healthcare workers, the administrators in hospitals, that this is happening, and how we go about doing that is we do it both online and in person. We have individual bargaining units who have Facebook pages. We post related to reporting and actions they can utilize if an assault occurs to their members once a month. Our union homepage on our website, massnurses.org, it features a workplace violence reporting form right on the homepage that members can use. We put articles out in our Mass Nurse publication, which goes out 4 times a year, and one of those times is to all nurses in Massachusetts, just not MNA members, frequently about workplace violence incidents, reporting what we can do. And we ask our members in our bargaining units to have that included as an agenda item on all of their labor management meetings, and offer to help in setting up programs. So when we talk about efforts, not only of the education of those people, we also need to direct, in order to organize and advocate politically, our legislators and people that also can influence those legislators. So we have, in-district meetings with nurses and healthcare professionals from those legislators' districts, whether we meet in the district or up the state house. We bring nurses in to meet with their legislators to talk about the incidents of workplace violence in their facilities, what is going on, what is the hospital's response, and the need to pass legislation. We've talked to members of the judiciary. We have talked to chiefs of the Chief of Police Association. We met with all of the DAs in Massachusetts. The prior year, it was before COVID, in order to ask them to support our legislation, which they unanimously voted to do so. And then just in general, society at large, which, we advocate, like we are frequently called upon to meet with reporters and, for articles in national and local publications. We go on the radio, wherever we're asked to go, we're going to go to talk about this issue in order to increase the public awareness. We have nurses write letters to the editor. If there's like specific, facilities, in certain areas of the state where, there's a sudden influx of incidents and things need to be addressed. We go to public and legislative hearings on any of our legislation that we file related to workplace violence. And we have nurses and healthcare professionals who will go and testify. We also advocate politically by joining forces with other unions who represent healthcare workers, across the state. So we work with other unions because, it's not just nurses who are being assaulted in the workplace. It is transport people and secretaries and dietary people and, housekeeping. I mean, you name it, that security guards. I mean, it is not just nurses who are being assaulted in the workplace. And we want to be able to diminish the amount of workplace violence that is going on, but also to make sure that those workers, reap the benefits of any legislation that, would be passed. And we advocate at all times for comprehensive programs. Like I had told you, in healthcare settings, we have always been willing to meet with management. We have on many, many occasions, management has actually reached out to us because they know that, we are very well versed in it, and we've been working on this issue for well over 20 years. And we are always available to meet with healthcare settings, whether it's union or non-union, it doesn't matter to us. It's the worker who matters. We could probably go to the next slide. So these are some of the resources that, and I'll just talk briefly about each one that we utilize at the MNA and what we have utilized to help as we move forward on advocating for our workers. We have a new workplace violence reporting form, which is confidential for our members to report. They can fill it out and send it in, or they can do it electronically right on the website, right at the workplace, from their phone if they want to. It goes right to our health and safety division. And this is one of the things that we are absolutely able to utilize, not only in labor management meeting, but when we move forward to meet with other people, judiciary, DAs, legislators, et cetera. We can put a stack of this so that it's not anecdotal information that we're being given, given out, but this is factual information. This is what happened to this particular worker at this site. Many years ago, we developed a workplace violence booklet that came about with, at the time, it was Congressman Keating. He was, at the time, I believe he was a representative at the time. And he worked with our workplace violence task force, and they developed a response to workplace violence booklet. That booklet is now, and brochure is now available in English, French, German, Spanish for our workers. It's available for anyone at the MNA who would like to utilize it. We are looking to update it with some of the things, but these are some of the things. We have workplace violence prevention at the MNA. We have a health and safety division that works with the task force and also is a resource for members and non-members who have been assaulted. We talk about legal interventions with our members, trying to educate them as to what is the response, that it is not part of your job, that you have the legal right to call the police, that you have the legal right to file charges. The board of directors at the MNA updated and came out with a workplace violence and abuse prevention position statement on it, and include OSHA standards in it, what we believe would should encompass a good workplace violence prevention program within a hospital, and then how we go about addressing that. I think we can go on to the next slide. So we also developed actions you should take if assaulted at work. We have them in small little card form that people can put right into their ID badges, their lanyards. And it is basically, just a number of steps that you would utilize if you are assaulted at work. And it can be basic things. It can be like, remove yourself from the site, report to, your work, facility, the assault, report to your union, the assault, file, a workplace violence reporting form, go to the emergency room if you're injured, take photos of any of your injuries, start utilizing a diary in order to keep track of, what you've been going through. Ask for, call the police if you want. It is your right to be able to call the police. Ask for any reports, those types of things. And so we have that available to our members. We are trying now that, we're starting to meet more in person to go out and talk about these things with our members one-on-one in our bargaining units. We also, talk about all types of forms of workplace violence. It's not just assaults. We also have things that our members can utilize, to recognize and respond to bullying at work. And, the examples of what bullying, can be, and, how to develop a plan in order to address bullying at work. We have OSHA guidelines that we follow for preventing workplace violence to healthcare and social service workers. That's included in our position statement. It is included in our brochures. It is one of those things that is nationally recognized, and we do utilize it. We also have utilized OSHA at some of our facilities and had brought them in, like kind of drop a dime to OSHA. Like, there's a lot of workplace violence going on here right now. We've had a number of people who have been injured quite severely. We'd like you to come in and take a look, because, there is a general duty clause for hospitals and healthcare facilities to provide a safe environment. And it is the right of the worker to, notify OSHA if they believe that's not happening. And they do come in and they investigate. And oftentimes they do find fault with some of the policies and procedures of the hospital, and they'll come up with an action plan that the hospital must use. I would give an example that many years ago at Brockton Hospital, Signature Hospital, there were an unbelievable amount of 911 calls to the police from the emergency room at that facility. The nurses called OSHA. OSHA came in and investigated. There were some simple recommendations that were made, including just shutting off the entrances after a certain point of night. So there was only one form of entrance into the hospital, and that alone helped. And it was, unbelievably cost effective. Like, it didn't cost them anything to do that. And the drop in calls to 911 was miraculous. The latest thing that we've been working on is model workplace violence and abuse prevention language for collective bargaining units. I will say that, we took a look at that and used best practice models that we've gotten through nursing publications and, research. Some of our other contracts within the MNA of bargaining units have some language. We utilize that. And we also utilize some of the language and tweaked it a bit, that is in our legislative bills. We're now also working on a training. We sent that out, the model language, to every bargaining unit, to the committees, with a letter explaining, this is what this is. Please take this for your facility as you enter into negotiations. When you do enter into negotiations, tweak it whichever way you'd like to your facility that would meet your needs. But this is what we consider the gold standard for contract language. And if you do currently have contract language related to workplace violence prevention programs or response, then take a look at this, and perhaps you can add or change some of your language within your contract. We are also now working on a training for our bargaining units, which would be related to how do our bargaining unit members respond to incidents of workplace violence against another one of their members. Because in all honesty, and it goes back to education, a lot of our nurses, they have no idea. Like, what do I do? I've just been assaulted at work. I don't know what to do. Like, my hospital, my nurse manager is telling me to do this, but I don't think that's right. And then, I asked if there was a report, the next day, and they don't have anything, or they won't give it to me. Or, I asked if, they would call the police, and they won't, and like those types of things. So, we are working on that, a training, which hopefully will be developed, and we'll be able to be bringing that out to our units like sometime later this spring. We could go on to the next slide, so I want to leave room for questions. So when I talked about legislation, this is one of our key pieces of legislation, which is an act requiring healthcare employers to develop and implement programs to prevent workplace violence. We have filed this the last couple of years. I will say that last year was the first year that it got as far as it did. People need to understand that last year, the legislature had over 8,000 bills that were filed. So they certainly don't pass 8,000 bills every year. But, every year this bill gets a little bit further. So that this year, both in the House and the Senate, it ended up making it to Ways and Means Committee in both houses. And that's the farther it's gone. We are hoping to continue with traction, on this bill. I think even the Hospital Association, who for many years denied that there was a problem whatsoever, is now fully acknowledging that there is a problem with workplace violence within the facilities. And so we will be refiling this legislative session. And it does require healthcare employees to perform an annual safety risk assessment. And when we say annual, that means they have to take a look at it annually. They need to come up with a plan for any safety risks that are identified, develop a plan to minimize those dangers, and then put that in place. Then the following year, they have to take a look at it, see what is working, other things that should be added or changed, and do it again. For those people who work in a union facility, union members need to be a part of that discussion. We also talked about the need for members, people who are assaulted to be able to have paid time away from work in order to attend court hearings, because oftentimes we hear that that has been an impediment in order for our people to be able to pursue charges against people. I would hope that, this year will be the year that we will be able to do something on that. I would say that, the MNA has been successful, over the years, in some legislation related to health and safety. So, we passed a bill for needle stick protections, in our healthcare facilities. We helped to get a law passed related to ICUs, related to the number of patients and nurses required to care for in any of our intensive care units across Massachusetts. We got a law passed banning mandatory overtime for our nurses, including that there be no longer any regularly scheduled shifts that are over 12 hours in a 24-hour period, which, not only helps to protect the license of the registered nurse, but it also helps to protect the safety of the patients. These are the types of things that we are working on. We partner up with as many people as we can, including community groups. It's another way to organize and advocate politically. We had a large coalition related to, patient safety and limits on the number of patients that a nurse should take care of at any one time. We call on those, that coalition and those people that we have partnered with in the past. And, these types of things are something that benefits everyone. So we've never had a problem, getting people to join with us. And so, we're very happy to have, these people who help us with all of these things. So I know that was a lot, but I think it's important for people to know that yes, you can be an active change. You can organize and advocate and have others join you for the common good. So I really thank the Labor Guild for putting this together. And I think, I don't know, Lisa, how we go about it, because we're on a different screen than what everybody else is.
Right.
Any questions that anybody might have, I'd be happy to answer. And I know our last slide, you can always go to massnurses.org. And there's lots and lots of material there related to health and safety for healthcare workers and others. So
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you very much for your advocacy. And we'll make sure that we'll put in the chat on the Facebook, both the website for both the Mass Nurses as well as Al's MassCOSH as well. And then I know Jodi had dropped in our chat her email, and we'll make sure that we'll put that on the Facebook Live comments as well. So Kelly, do we know if there's any comments or questions on the Facebook?
I'm pulling it up now.
Great. We're joined by Father Mark, the Labor Guild's Executive Director.
Karen, thanks very much. Based on someone who worked for the VA for 5 years, I always tell people that when they're concerned for relatives or parents being brought in for VA care, that you really cannot enter the main entrance of a VA hospital without walking past the police station. And they're able to build upon past military relationship, et cetera, but they're quite clear of what kind of behaviors are not acceptable at all. And just having that awareness, I found it was not really in the foreground throughout my time there, and no particular incident. Yet it was an effort of the organization to reach out to patients and staff in the name of safety, I would say.
Yeah, and I would say it is like, I know just anecdotally, like when you take the T, there are signs right on the T there about like, abusing or being assaultive or making threats to any of the T employees, that you will be prosecuted. And so they will have that in like every train and bus, et cetera, that you might take in public transportation. But many of our hospitals would refuse to have those types of signs like in the lobby of their hospital. Because they would, I know that at my own facility that I worked at for close to 35 years, which was a Department of Mental Health facility, the COO said that, well, we don't want to scare the visitors. Well, we need to maybe scare them a little bit because, they need to just know, the governor long ago passed a zero tolerance for workplace violence in public facilities within Massachusetts, but you don't really see that being enforced. So.
Frustrating. So I know Al has to hop off momentarily. Do we have any questions or comments? Do we know, Kelly?
We do not.
Okay.
I have one question for Karen that I think would be great to know if the legislation that you talked about, have other states been able to enact something similar that we're like building off of, or is this something that's a little bit nuanced?
I would say that we in Massachusetts have been at the forefront of the workplace violence legislation, et cetera, for a number of years, and other states have actually piggybacked on what our legislation looked like. The only state that I know of that for a number of years has a law on the books related to this is New York State. Has law related to workplace violence, and that was upon the death of a social worker who went out for a home visit. So that being said, more and more states now are introducing legislation to increase penalties for assault and battery on healthcare workers. We also have legislation related to that. To increase, assault and battery on a healthcare worker, EMTs, paramedics, et cetera, that would bring it up to the felony level. So we do have those types of things. We have other legislation related to addressing, the boarding of psychiatric patients in EDs and putting them into pilot programs, because a lot of times if you're ED, you've got 40 beds in your ED and 29 of them to 35 of them are held by psychiatric patients looking, they need to be treated somewhere else. It's not appropriate to be treating patients in psychiatric crisis in an emergency room. And the increased risk goes up in the emergency room when you've got patients who are coming in who are elderly, who are children, et cetera. We've got legislation asking for specialized care units within the Department of Mental Health that would address those patients who fall outside the parameters of normal response to psychiatric treatment. They're considered outliers. They might be faced with very challenging behaviors through no fault of their own, but could include aggressive behaviors, self-injurious behaviors, destruction of property behaviors, and they really shouldn't be on other psychiatric units with other patients who are looking, because I will tell you that workplace violence, in a healthcare setting, it is traumatic for everyone. So it's not just the people who are assaulted, it's also the people who witness that assault, it's the patients that are also there seeking care. And this, we do have, PTSD, that responds from some of this. So, and I believe that there are a number of other states who are also addressing that. The need for more public health beds, to go back to like when, the 1980s when, you know, the federal government kind of put their hands up and said, we need to like close all of our state hospitals. Well, we're no longer going to give you federal funding for state hospitals. So it's up to the states now to take on that care. And the states are like, we're not going to do that. Like, you know what I mean? So, and now they're learning, you know, oh, good God, that didn't work. And it did a disservice to so many people. So we're looking at potentially like putting funding in to, you know, have more beds, access more care, those types of things. So, and that's happening across the country now, that there's increased legislation surrounding us.
Thanks so much for that updated perspective of what's happening nationally. Thanks, Ken.
Well, we want to thank you both. You know, we are so proud and pleased on behalf of the Labor Guild to partner with both the Massachusetts Nursing Association as well as MassCOSH. Both organizations do tremendous work, not only for advocacy, but also really getting work done to protect both health and safety, not only of their own members in the case of the Massachusetts Nurses Association, but also the greater community, other healthcare workers, as well as the patients. And of course, MassCOSH does tremendous work both for union and non-union workers. So it's for all workers. So again, we suggest that people go to the massnurses.org as well as masscosh.org to find out more information. And thank you very much. Check out the Labor Guild's website as well, laborguild.com, for some more information and other programs similar to this.